right, here we go. All right, I'd like to call to order the meeting of the Hollis School Board for Wednesday, September 4th, 2019. I think I can dispense with the preamble, so I'll do that to save time. So why don't we get right into it with any agenda adjustments?
I don't have an adjustment, but I do want the public at home to know that I gave you an updated enrollment report.
Yes.
I also provided, we had a meeting early this afternoon on the SAU barn and some other pieces. That's kind of what I'll call hot off the press.
Okay, great.
And Tammy and I attended that, so maybe together we can remember everything we discussed, because there were quite a few things that went on today.
So as part of our discussion of the SAU barn update, we'll be able to stitch that into that item in our agenda?
Correct.
Okay. All right.
Yep.
So no agenda. Any agenda items from the board members? No? Seeing none? We'll move on then. Approval of the meeting minutes?
Hold on. Secretary can do that. I was going to ask, can this become the secretary's task to do the meeting minutes and all that kind of thing?
It's fine by me.
That'd be easy.
Me? I wasn't at the meeting though. Does that still?
Okay, then I'll do it. I just wonder if anyone would mind that when we do the routine housekeeping around minutes, if the board secretary could do those, partly because it just feels like it's a board secretary task, if that's all right.
Any
The
comments
current
or
board secretary,
discussion
but
on that?
especially the chair and the admin. So
Sure.
do you get, may I ask before we go forward, do you all receive the outline that Dawn sends
We
out?
should be, yeah.
It's always just all in there. She's so meticulous and so careful to help us keep track. I don't know why I care about stuff like that. It just feels like it's a responsibility.
That's fine. We
But
can,
since you weren't there.
why don't we plan for next
okay?
next meeting?
Yeah.
To
And
do
if
that?
I'm not at the meeting, then it's
I
somebody
can
else.
do it. It doesn't actually matter. I just wanted to ask that. So I move to accept the meetings of the Hollis School Board from August 7, 2019. Sorry, the meeting minutes from the Hollis School Board, August 7, 2019.
Second?
Any discussion or amendments?
And then
Wow. Usually we do.
no, there aren't any, yeah.
Wow. All right. Well, seeing none, all in favor? All opposed? And abstentions?
And that's all the minutes that we have.
Wow, we're up to date. Okay, then we'll continue on with nominations, resignations, and correspondence.
We don't have any time.
All right. Let's move straight to the principal's report.
In the principal's report, the first thing I want to do is just spend a couple minutes on the enrollment, which is the page I just handed out to you. As you can see, starting at kindergarten, we are a +7, so we're presently at 17 in all of our sections. In grade 1, we're +1 from the last report, so we're at 18 across the board. We are +6 in grade 2, so we're 16, 16, 17, 17, and 17. In grade 3, we are 16, 17, 17, 17, and 19. Part of the disparity between the numbers is we had some people who left us very late in the summer, so that's why one of those is 16 and one of those is 19. But the next student who moves in will go into the room at the 16, and I believe that's occurring in the next couple of days. Up at Hughes, we're +1 in grade 4, for class sizes of 19 and 20, +2 at grade 5 for 19 and 4 sections of 20. In grade 6 is +1 for 20, 20, 20, 21, and 21. I will highlight more so at the primary school the disparity between the NSDEC projections. As we saw last year, we kind of started talking about, we are projecting Hollis to begin growing, and you see the NSDEC for 1920, they thought would be around 306. At the primary school, we're actually at 344, so that's a substantial difference. And not as big a difference up at Hughes, but still a difference from the projection of 287 to 299. And I would say that as long as the economy continues the way it is, that we'll see these numbers stay stable, if not continue to grow. We're seeing the same trend in our neighboring district of Brookline, where they had approximately 30 move-ins in their primary school this summer. So we're seeing a trend, and a lot of those move-ins, which is slightly different than in the past, the oldest child is the one that's joining the primary school.
Is this year particularly high? Are we seeing a blip of enrollments?
We're seeing a blip, but we're seeing a blip to all grades.
Yeah.
Some years we get one grade and everybody moves into grade X.
Yeah.
And we have a large class. This seems to be more across the board. But as you can see, 7 in kindergarten and 6 in grade 2 are the two largest areas. And grade 2 is one of those areas we weren't sure of our number of sections when we were originally talking last year, so that's worked out well for us.
Mm-hmm.
So Andy, the one pressure point is grade 1 where we're at spec.
Mm-hmm.
We have, hoping that just stays stable and.
Well, I think if we had a number of move-ins, like if one child moved in, that doesn't worry me, but if we had a number of move-ins, what I'd probably do is come back to the board and look at a paraprofessional. That would be shared by the two grades or the two classrooms that got larger. Because I think once a child has started a relationship, even if it's a short term with the teacher, nobody wants to move. So it's easier to change the adult and add an adult.
Yeah, and if I remember the policy, there's no hard number that triggers adding another section. I think we left it kind of open that way for the board and the administration to have a conversation of looking at the specific year and the specific needs. That trigger point may go up, may go down, depending on needs. So it's something that we certainly, as we go in further into the fall season, to keep a close eye on these grades, and if there's any other ticks, we probably want to have a specific conversation about.
And there's that potential. There are still a number of homes for sale.
Yeah.
But usually families who are trying to move in do typically try to move in before the school year.
Right.
But the other piece that we encounter a lot is that we will see a lot of people getting transferred maybe from company to company. They don't always control when they are asked to move. So we will watch that closely. Just some dates to highlight. Tomorrow, September 5th, is the open house for pre-K to grade 3 here at 5:30. And next week, the September 11th, is the open house for grades 4 to 6, beginning at 5:30. Also, September 10th is band rental night for Hollis and Brookline students, grades 4 to 6, and that's at Captain Samuel Douglas Academy over in Brookline for anybody who's interested in that. Just to go over quickly the updates at the bottom of the page, Hughes installed fencing around the playground area, and some sections were replaced as needed. They have been stained, and plans for updating this will continue throughout the year. Tiling of the lower level is complete and finishing touches are underway. It came out really nice. I'd like to thank our custodians because really we came right down to the wire with the tiling, installing the toilets basically the Friday before, and we did the bathrooms. And that was kind of a domino effect. We had a variety of tiling that needed to be done across the SAU. And we worked with a wonderful company who was new to us, so we're very happy with their performance. They did the curb painting, refreshing the parking lot lines have been completed, and very little materials or anything for classrooms are on the back order. Classrooms are pretty much ready to go. HPS, they did the painting, the deep cleaning, floor waxing, new carpets, and lots of shuffling of furniture was done as we moved things around. We took down approximately 40 trees from the playground area for safety, so we really cut that back. I don't think there's a tree that could fall now and land on the playground, which we're very excited about. The playground equipment that was damaged last spring was replaced and is ready to go. And we have sorted all our new materials and they are out to the teachers and they are ready to go. As I said, Hughes has 22 new students this year. We did a number of meet and greets over the summer for new families, which was really nice in a very small setting. We are welcoming Ann Elsa, as I told the board at the last meeting, as a special ed administrator for the Hollis schools. And HPS has 24 new students. They had a very successful summer hosting RTI and ESY from pre-K to grade 6, and they're looking forward to their open house, which is hard to believe it's tomorrow night. You know, it is probably, and Mr. Thompson is experiencing that. We're starting the rotation, so Bob is not here tonight, and we'll continue to go. But I will tell you, he's thoroughly enjoying the fact that you get to go visit kindergarten and pre-K, and they have a lot more parties at that level, and a lot more fun classroom activities than they necessarily do at the middle school. So he was saying just today that he feels very fortunate to see that side of education, because oftentimes as a principal, you get isolated to your age group, and that's all you're able to see.
There's nothing better than circle time in kindergarten.
So that's it for the principal's reports.
Good.
Yeah, the playground looks great.
Yeah, they did a
Yeah.
nice job.
One has been completed for sure. Okay, I know we're a little early. We usually at 6:20 we have public input. Is there any public input at this time? No? Okay, so we'll keep an eye on if we have a huge influx of community members that wish to give us input. We'll review that. With that said, why don't we move to discussions, transportation updates.
Yes, I'm very happy to report that we have a full complement of drivers. That is being achieved right now through cross-rostering. But we have drivers in training, which probably by the end of this month will allow those cross-rostering drivers to go back to their districts. They have worked really hard with their drivers. They provided 2 complete days before school started to go about the route, so all drivers did practice runs on their route. We actually have a spare driver because our mechanic has always driven in the past. So the other day, we actually had a driver unexpectedly call in sick on the way in Brookline, so the mechanic was able to jump in the bus and take care of that. We do envision trying to increase our spare drivers as well, but that goes well. The STA person has been visiting our buildings and meeting the principals, so that's very nice for them to be able to put a name and a face to an email contact. You also are aware that the Hollis management crew has stayed on board to date, so that goes very well. So we got a familiar face over there with Kim. The buses have been rolling out of Hughes between 320 and 325, and we track that every year, and that's very good for a first week because everything's a domino, so that we've got to get all the middle schoolers on the bus. And it's new to them because this is the first time where they're not walked out by a teacher. It's just the bell rings and you go to your buses, and for some kids that can be very difficult, and it takes a few days. Then they have to then they move to the high school, and it's getting our new senior drivers who want to get out of the parking lot as fast as they can to realize that the buses get to go first. So there's always a little conflict the first few days, but they've been doing a great job. So Paula reported this morning they've actually been arriving early to primary school, which is very exciting. And then for them getting out between 3:20 and 3:25 at this time of year, it'll only get better because the routine will get better. And we're hoping that as we get better on transportation, that the parent pickup lines are reduced a little, which will further enhance that. On the first day of school, we had no children return to the buildings. So that means every parent was there waiting for them. Everything went really well. We had absolutely no calls or concerns. As I told you last month, the bus fleet has been updated, so they're all pretty much, I would say the entire fleet is now 2016 or better. You may notice the new swing arms. I encountered one of our buses on Main Street, and they were dropping off our youngest children, and it's really nice because those swing arms guarantee the driver of that bus can see the child. So it's not necessarily for people crossing, it's that they're far enough away from the bus that they can now go out and look both ways. So that safety item has been done, new cameras, new radios, big rehab at the actual bus barn. So I think it goes well, and as we go through the year, we'll be looking at a couple of things that would be an additional cost, but things that you may want to consider. And I'll give you one example would be the potential to add GPS so that you could have an app on your phone and know the buses around the corner are coming. And that would help us greatly in the winter months, as the snow impacts and that. So we'll look at some of those pieces, bring them back to the board, because those would be additional costs above the transportation. And we're also more of an SAU discussion, because it's an SAU contract.
Yes.
You know,
And you need to outfit the buses, right, with the
correct.
equipment? Yeah.
Correct.
Buses come with it, it's a service you have to buy.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So, just to remind us, that the STA took over the contract that we signed with Hollis Transportation. So anything that wasn't in that contract, if we want it and they offer it, it's extra. It's not any kind of switch up or anything. It's just fair and square. We signed for certain services, and they took those on without the additional cost, but anything, other services they provide that we want, those would be additional.
So I would say overall, I'm very happy with our first 6 to 10 days, and that's across the SAU. We've had 2 glitches. Like I said, one driver was sick, so the call didn't come in till late. They weren't expecting to be sick. So that bus, which was a co-op bus and a Brookline bus, got out a little late. And the only other glitch is we actually reversed a route because it made it much better and safer for pickup, and the bus company just failed to get that notice out to everybody. And that, again, was in Brookline. But those are the 2 things that I would normally see happen at this time of year anyways, whether we were a company we were with forever or a brand new company. So hopefully parents are experiencing that. And from our point of view as administrators, our emails get returned very quickly. We get phone calls about anything, so I think it's been very good to deal with.
Absolutely.
All right. Any questions relating to transportation? All right, seeing none, why don't we move on to the SAU barn update?
I handed you out a memo that's back in May, because I wanted to use that kind of as our guide. When we met last May, we discussed 5 possibilities for the SAU barn. Numbers, 1 was minor renovations to our existing offices, which does not include the barn. The renovation of the barn and the potential for adding an elevator. The second proposal was to gut and rehab the existing offices, to renovate the barn and elevator in total. We are pretty much, at this point in time, going to be coming back with one of those 2 options. It's not really feasible to do any of the last 3 proposals from an economic standpoint, and from a standpoint of when we open up the renovation, if we go to a certain degree, we're going to trigger all ADA compliance and those issues. So we want to make sure that we're balancing that. There's also the potentials in options 1 and 2 that, depending on what the estimated cost comes out to be, we may not need an elevator. An elevator is a function of the cost. When we look at the barn, we will only have offices on the 2nd floor, but we will have enough space on the 1st floor that if we were meeting with somebody who had a disability, we could easily accommodate them, and there'd be plenty of places in the existing SAU. So, again, at this point in May, these 2 figures of $1,198,600 for the minor renovations of the offices, and the figure of $1,582,000 for the gut and rehab of the existing offices were the 2 pieces. And that lends us into what was in the board packet, which is the discussion on the barn. I provided you the entire barn piece, not that I wanted you to sit there and go through every detail, but I thought it was important for you to understand the extent of the work that's been done to make sure that we were dealing with a structure that was feasible to be able to be used. As you know, we are working with Dave Ely as our architect. He's the architect that worked with us on this project. He has brought in a barn specialist, a mechanical engineer, and a HVAC person. So we have all the components, and what I wanted to do is really just highlight a couple of the pages in the report. So the first one I'd like to start with, if you were looking at the bottom right-hand corner, it has a capital A1-1, and it would be a picture of the whole first floor of the facility. Okay? On the far right, we have the existing first floor. And as you'll note there aren't many changes whatsoever to the existing structure or room sizes or anything there. There's some movement of people around that we've talked about, but that structure is basically staying intact. The main entrance will remain the same, but the difference is when you walk into what is the present reception area, if you immediately turn to your left, you'd see a coat closet right now. That coat closet will be disappearing and will become the hallway to the barn. And what we have for our present conference room will become an office for somebody, because it will get smaller. When we get to the barn, we see, first of all, a conference room that we would utilize for our board meetings, and we would open it up to be utilized by town committees and groups that need meeting space as well. We have a couple offices on the first floor, and those offices would be assigned to present staff to alleviate some of the congestion that we have across the facility.
Can I ask a quick question?
Always.
Talking about the space on the first floor of the barn being able to be used by community members, is that something that you're looking as a source of income potentially to rent the space out, or is it a complementary usage for?
I would say it's a complementary. I know the town has a policy where I believe it's $10 just so more that people know you're using it. So if we did anything, it would be that type of thing. But I think there are a number of organizations that could use a place to meet, and to me, it is a community facility. You know.
Could we set policy around it? For example, like we do for the schools, certain types of organizations, there's no charge. Commercial organizations are out of taxpayer base. Yes.
I think if it was a for-profit group,
Or an out-of-town group.
or an out-of-town, we could consider charging that. My first piece would be, it would be a no. If it was out-of-town or that, but again, we can go through that from a policy point of view and decide what the board would like to do.
Thank you.
Yeah, it would be good at some point down the line to have a policy in place, because it gives standing to make, when we have to say no, we can point to policy.
Right.
So we're not just coming up with, rules of the day.
Right.
Well, people who don't want to get don't get the answer they want, will make those kind of
We have
arguments.
very explicit policy around the use of the school facilities. And
Yes,
that would probably
and-
be a form of basis for that.
Absolutely.
One of the pieces with the barn is it would be elevated, and they would install a brand-new foundation underneath it. And that area would be segmented off to 4 storage areas, and that's where we would put all our required records that we are required to keep. That's one of the reasons this project got started, because all those records now exist in the attic, and that weight really shouldn't be up there, so we've done a lot over the last few years to alleviate much of that, but we're required by law to keep many of our records for many, many years. So that basement facility would become a very nice storage space and allow us to be able to meet the requirements that we have.
And it would be closed. It's not going to be open to the elements like now.
No, it would be absolutely closed. It would be vented and, airflow and all of those pieces, so it would work to our advantage. Moving to what is A1-2, the next page. First, going back to the original SAU office, one of the major changes is as you go up the stairs, maybe bathroom at the top of the stairs. That bathroom has a wonderful 1950s vintage tub that you can't find just anywhere anymore.
Are we utilizing that for bubble baths?
Yeah, absolutely, yes. Again, one of the reasons why you bring in an architect is they immediately see things. His recommendation is to remove that tub and make that. I know, I do that part. But the part,
told you that for free.
right, but the part I didn't realize is that becomes your hallway, and all of a sudden, everybody up there has a private office space. There's no
An
more.
office on the landing of the stairs, I know?
Correct, you would no longer go through an office to get to an office.
Interesting.
But I noticed that for Rich Raymond's office also.
Right, so that is the only significant change on the second floor, and that will provide our business staff with the space that they need and to conduct their meetings. One of the things we will do is Kerry Marsh, who's our HR coordinator, will come down to the first floor, because she probably meets with the public and new staff and that more than anybody. So to bring her down to the first floor, and she'll actually take over what would be my existing office. And I will move out to the back corner where,
Out to the barn.
no, I'm not, I didn't get a barn office. No.
I was waiting for a pastor joke. I'm kidding.
I like that. The middle section from the barn to the current office just shows our emergency staircase right now, so that would not be changing. It would still bring us down to the exact same spot, which would be the right next to what is the conference room that we presently have. The second floor of the barn, we see a series of offices and a waiting area, along with a bathroom facility. That's a piece that will allow us to, again, one of the things we will do in the old building is move towards more commercial bathrooms than residential, so those two will be updated. We'll have a new commercial bathroom on the second floor. A2-1, the next page. I just wanted to show you the elevations. The white rendering at the top of the page, that is the existing porch where our main entrance is. The barn doors that you see there will be fixed. They're not opening. They're for aesthetic purposes, architectural purposes. All the windows will be replaced to match the period. So the windows on the sides that are small 6x6 would stay small 6x6, and the ones that are traditional double-hung windows would stay traditional double-hung windows, but be upgraded. And you can see the bottom shows you the new facade, which is the side of the barn. The barn would have a new metal roof installed. You see that the ground floor would be adding 2 windows. All the other windows exist, except I believe for the upper 2, and those are being added for ventilation purposes. You see the same main entrance. The second entrance to the left of that is the emergency from the second floor that we talked about that comes down right now, so that will be staying there. One of the things we have talked about is if you look at the little window on the left in the connecting section, we probably will extend windows right across there because it's also one of our places where we legally post all our notices. And when we go into budget season at certain times of the year, there's no space. And so we'll extend those and give us an opportunity to have a place for the community to see any legal notices that are required to be placed. We'll clean up the porch area on the existing SAU building, and you might have noticed we've already done quite a bit of landscaping this summer. We removed our dead pine tree, took out a lot of the growth. And then A22, this gives us just the rear view. So we see the existing rear door emergency exit, the windows that provide us the architectural balance. And then again, the big thing on the barn portion, the bottom of the picture on the bottom, is the handicap ramp that will get you into the barn, and the handicap ramp that would extend you into the present SAU offices. So you'll have a handicap ramp on both sides of the building. And we would gain a couple parking spaces on the property on what is, I would say, is out the back side, the side furthest away from here.
Would they both be handicap spots for that purpose of using the ramp?
We would have probably one on each side for using the ramp, because we have the, right in front of the barn is the handicap spot, and then we would add one on the back side to accommodate folks who might have to pack out back. Just staying with the architectural drawings, one of the things I've learned from our discussion is our barn is in very good shape. Because we're taking care of the roof over the years, that's the most important piece of a barn. Most of the first floor wood would be removed, and that's because, believe it or not, from its time as a barn, the animal smells and that will never come out of that wood. But the second floor and that, all those beams are in great shape. They would add some structural pieces, but they would do it in an architectural format to stay within the time period of the barn. It is, according to the barn expert, he hasn't seen many of this style. It actually has 2 stairs, one on each side, which was a sign of wealth, because again, it was for animals. So he has been very impressed. He is quite confident with that. Just to, if you read, and I'm not going to go through them, but just so you understand how the package works, after architectural 4-1, you get into a whole series that is the structure of the barn, the structural engineer. So all his diagrams and that is more very technical. I'm not looking to review that tonight. Then after that section, which goes on probably about 30 pages, we get into the mechanical piece, and we would be looking at air source heat pumps in there, which we presently have in the current SAU.
Those work well for you guys?
They do, yeah. And we're also trying to, when we get into the H-step discussion, there may be a way that we can tie the SAU into the solar panels here, or in today's discussion, it came up that the barn roof is actually ideal, and they believe that just a few solar panels on the barn roof would eliminate, the air source heat pumps from the electric. So that would be being looked at.
Yeah, we need to look at that for sure.
Yeah.
And it's a great direction.
Southern exposure.
Yeah,
Right.
great southern exposure for that.
So,
And would we follow a similar lighting upgrades in the offices as well that we're doing for each step?
most of the offices will be replaced by our own staff, because it's just the fixtures. So, it's a relatively small number as opposed to like the elementary or the primary school. The barn would also be all updated to new electrical, new LED lights, very energy efficient. But it would keep the same appearance from the outside.
Yes.
So the insulation and all that would be done in such a way that it would still have the traditional barn look that represents the community, and we sit on the edge of the historic district, so I think it would be appropriate.
How old is the barn? What year is it? Do we know?
They put it back probably around the Civil War, maybe slightly older than that.
Was it discussed at all in the committee, the history of the barn at all? Like,
We don't have that much history. We know there was an operating farm for many years.
Do you happen to know something about it?
I don't. I wonder if the Historical Society does at all.
There's a lot of mystery around what that, any specifics about it from the oldest times, but there are a lot of people, right, who have some information.
It'd be interesting, once the project's finished, to have something visual in the community room. A lot of people in Hollis
I
like.
think that's a great idea, listing the history of the building, absolutely.
Okay, we've had to get photographs. That's always cool.
Yeah, well,
Mill buildings.
when we get into our leadership retreat, we can kind of touch on that, because I think we've made a wonderful connection as part of our retreat this year. I'll share that in a few moments. So with the board's permission, if I could go over to the material from today's meeting. which is the packet I handed out from Windy Hill Associates.
Before we jump to that really quick, that's the specifics of the project. So we have talked for a number of years now about segregating the field from the
Yeah, I was gonna
building.
bring
Is
that
that part of?
I continue my same recommendation. I believe that the field, when we go, at some point throughout this project, should be deeded to the school buildings and not the SAU building. So if 20 years down the road you wanted to sell the SAU building, you get the parking spaces, whatever land the board deems appropriate, but that the land behind always remains for the school, because if you had to build another school or something, it's not a huge parcel, but it's a very good parcel of land.
Yeah, so we would want to consider any surveying costs to subdivide the property and so forth. I think that there's expectation that should be part of this work.
I agree.
Also, you didn't mention septic, and if you're going to expand like that, are there going to be costs to expanding the septic system, or replacing it, or upgrading it?
For the SAU?
Yeah.
No, we have no issues septic-wise at the SAU.
And I just want to comment that Mrs. Fowler absconded with all the plants that were removed. And did it not go to waste?
No, we didn't. No, we did not just run them over. They were moved.
She came and dug them up herself in a greenhouse.
We just have to remember to turn the water on.
She went and cleaned.
She went and pulled them up
Up a fuse.
herself and took them up the gears because
Yep.
she loves gardening, so I just wanted to give her
Good
props.
for her, that's
It
great.
was, yep. So direct from today's meeting, this is kind of what I'll call H-step component, because if you remember, this project has three components: the SAU bond and upgrades to the SAU, elements of H-step that apply to both Hughes and HPS, and then the last piece that we're still working on is CIP items, capital improvement projects. Okay, so what we're doing is we're broken down H-step into, as I said previously, areas where we need a certain level of expertise will have to be overseen by a mechanical, an electrical engineer, an architect, something like that, that kind of goes beyond Kelly and my skill set. We would still be what I'll call project managers and still take care of the financing around it, but at the same time, these people would jump in as the experts. And the lead person right now is Windy Hill Associates, the architect Dave Ely, who again did this project. So the first elements, we would finish the 13 classrooms plus 6 at HPS. Those are the 13 classrooms that we did not install heat source air pumps, and the six interior rooms which were not originally addressed at all. And we would look at the heat and recovery for the ventilation purposes in all of those 19 rooms, and using the design that was already completed. So there's not necessarily a design piece to this. The boiler consolidation, we have 2 boiler rooms right now in HPS. We would be consolidating to 1. What came out of our discussions today is we will look at both rooms. We have one, just for your knowledge, that is down near the kitchen, and one that is down near second grade. In our first and primary discussions, we were looking at eliminating the one near second grade, and that space would be recaptured for storage and things like that. During our discussion today, we're also looking at being able to upgrade our kitchen facility. So the question came up, since the boiler room is right next to the kitchen, would that allow us greater flexibility to do the kitchen? So we have asked for more details from the kitchen expert on that. Hot water. The current hot water tanks are old and not functioning well. One is old, the other is electric, and they are not located in optimal locations. So they're going to be looking at redesigning it. We will be having the same discussion we had up of Hughes oil versus propane. If we go to a propane boiler, we'll probably run the hot water off of that. Part of the thought process of looking to go to propane is that we have underground oil tanks that will need to come out in approximately 5 years. So it may be to our benefit, so we're not dealing with potential environmental issues, to dig those tanks up during this project, like we did at Hughes, replace them with the propane tanks, and change and convert to all propane. That would give us both buildings on the same fuel, and that would put both buildings along with the town all on propane, and we do use that for buying power. Yep, we do. One of the things we're looking at is we have been, as the board will note, we replaced our controller at HPS. What we'd like to do is expand that control system so that we can do more regulation of temperatures and things like that remotely. So our custodians won't necessarily have to be in the building. If all of a sudden we know it's a snow day and that was a Friday, we can adjust the Friday heat to normal weekend temperatures and gain from that. So we'd like to do more of that remotely, so we're looking at better controls. We have exterior light replacement. We will be doing that again through our own custodians. We have already done Hughes, and we will be working with our internal people to do the work here at HPS. We will be upgrading the lighting in both buildings. We have looked at a variety of products and a variety of different things that are hitting the market. We had an existing plan that was done for H-Step Phase 1. We made the decision today to stick with that plan. One, it's cost effective, and two, it will accomplish all the goals. And those lights would have dimmers for teachers in the classroom, and many issues around lighting are now governed by code issues. So the amount of light in the room, the amount of fixtures in the room, all of that is now part of code, and we would be upgraded to the code. Exterior doors, we're looking at a couple of areas where we'd like to create some potential, what I'll call airlocks, meaning that when you open the door, you're not opening to the outside. And I'll give you the example down here, where you enter off the ramp, looking at an airlock there, looking at an airlock outside the music room, looking at a structure out in the kindergarten, looking at potentially something where we have parent pickup line. We right now have that concrete, 3 concrete piers, and the kids wait there. It may be to our advantage to do something there, which would also force children to come this way. If you take a parent pickup right now, the concrete's there, but a child can go right out to where the cars are. We're thinking of closing that in, so all children will be forced to go to the right. So that will hopefully slow them down, and no one would ever, run out to see mom or dad and something unfortunate happen. So we have a number of entry doors that we're looking at and be considering for upgrades. We had a discussion around shading devices on the southern side. We went with internal shades, and the architect did the study, and he believes those are not needed at this point, so those will be coming off the list because of the internal shades and the new windows. One of the things that HPS does not have is a sprinkler system, so we will be looking at incorporating that into our older building here. That is a big ticket item, but it does further provide protection for our students, as well as provide protection for the physical building itself. And I know that when we did H-Step 1, that was something the chief was hoping would make it through the first time. It didn't. I think he would very much appreciate it, because I think it's been kind of an ongoing discussion with him for about 20 years to see this become sprinkled.
I'm going to interrupt and clarify for folks who are new that the buildings this age throughout the state tend not to have sprinkler systems. It's not at all unusual, grandfather, et cetera, but Andy's been trying to figure out a way to get this built in for a long time.
Are there going to be any cost benefits to that?
Insurance.
Better insurance rates or anything like that because it...
I would say there'd be slight, and I only say that because you're insuring a massive entity, because it's SAU insurance for all 6 buildings, the SAU building, all your liability around students, teachers, transportation,
is an umbrella.
Yeah, so it's a massive policy. We went through those questions. A couple of years ago, we were adding some vans to the high school, and when you think of your own policy at home, you add a car or something like that, it's going to be a big deal. I mean, I think it was like less than $20 for us to be covered under the policy, because it's such a massive policy. Yeah.
Is this
It's
one
not
of the
basic.
last buildings that lack sprinkler systems in the SAU?
I don't think
Does RMS have
RMS has it either.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
This whole vintage of buildings across
Yeah.
the country, really, but
The kitchen, this goes back to that catch-22 with the septic system. Obviously, if we're going to do work on the kitchen, we will be looking at the septic system, because we need to bring the grease trap up to code. So we're also looking at, for our discussion later, we go through an awful lot of styrofoam trays, probably 600 a day, because we can't have a dishwasher. At this point, we don't have the room, the hot water facility, those type of things. So this gives us an opportunity to look at that and see if we can make that happen as we do this renovation project. But at the same time, we have tight square footage. We don't want to lose any space from the multi-purpose room. We don't necessarily want to go in the direction of our kindergarten classrooms, because those are a little smaller than your typical rooms to begin with. So that's why looking at those boiler rooms. The other thing we'll look at is we have freezers and coolers that are very, very large. And are they really needed for this scope as you go into the future with different things and ordering and things like that? So there are a number of things going on there.
Would these upgrades also extend the life of this septic system with these upgrades?
I would say anything that takes the grease away would, increase the life.
Sure.
But
Makes sense.
I don't think if we do the kitchen that we're automatically doing the septic, but I think it sets us up well. Because one of the reasons septics tend to last longer for schools is because you're not open 3 months a year. So you have a time period where it really dries out, and it's not like at home where somebody's always showering.
Yeah, okay.
One of the things we're also looking at is a possibility of a ramp for the kindergarten. If you were to be a child in a wheelchair, right now you have to come all the way across through the multi-purpose room and out one of the 2 exits on this side of the building. If it was a true emergency, a staff member would just pick up the child and take them. But at the same time, if we're going to be doing something in this scope, we should at least look at it and get a cost item to put a ramp in there. In our discussions today, we believe that the stairs that go out presently will actually be reduced and come closer to the building, because the ramp would go down, and it would also give us an airlock from an energy point of view. So we're looking at that. Moving up to Hughes. During H-Step 1, we encountered large sections of significant metal beams that nothing is ever done. If you were to go up in one of the peaks at Hughes, you can actually see the outside. So from a heat loss, energy efficiency, that's a concern. The other thing is we had the temperature taken of the steel beam during the winter last year. It was 7 degrees.
And air is flowing over this thing directly into the building because of the way the expansions were cobbled together. There turned out to be the space where the ceiling and the roof don't actually fully meet. They're blocked, but they don't fully meet because of the steel beam, and air from the outside flows across this thing into the building.
And when it gets down to 7 degrees, we spend a lot to heat that beam up to get the room back to normal temperature.
As the engineers discovered, the building was under negative pressure, which means that when you open one door, it sucks in air from the outside through all these open places.
So the piece there would be we'd be doing the blown-in insulation, similar to the wrapping we did here, and that would end that problem and give us a much more efficient building. We did discuss and decided to reject additional solar panels at this point in time for Hughes. That was simply done looking at the data. We're running about 85% efficiency, meaning that we still have some room on our solar panels up there. So adding them would also probably force us to do another section of the roof. So when you look at the overall cost for a roof that doesn't need to be replaced, because what happens is when you keep doing roofs, they keep growing in height. And then when you want to put the solar panels on, you have to remove much of that height to get down to the level you want to be at. So it's just not cost effective from the return on investment nor the cost of installing them.
So the solar panels are providing our demand today, plus we have another 15% of...
Basically, yes. Yep.
The biggest problem is that the state's net metering limits are such that when we produce more than we use, we don't get paid for it.
Yeah.
So, because that all changed right around the time we were putting this project together.
I think we're grandfathered in for that.
Well, for some, but not if we added that wouldn't be the case, so that would be new. So there's not an incentive to overproduce.
And a few panels on the SAU roof versus another solar array. One of the other things that's come into play, obviously, this is an item that's affected by tariffs. So the prices skyrocketed on things like that.
Are we going to be able to get ahead of this, the metering, the peak demand stuff? I know...
It's well underway. Eric Reinhardt, who's with the Hollis Energy Committee, I'll publicly thank him because he's donating hours upon hours to find out exactly what devices are causing these overages. One of them is the hot water heater at Hughes, but part of the problem is when we don't have dishwashers, we're calling on this huge tank to heat up to meet the requirements for the health code to wash the dishes that we have to clean up there. So it's kind of a catch-22, but Eric has been on it. He's actually here tomorrow doing some more work. And this is all in his volunteer.
Also, there's a strong possibility, and that's tomorrow morning, that the Munters unit, which is the huge dehumidifier at Hughes, may have been left based on what was needed to remediate the mold situation, but maybe never recalibrated. And the guesstimate from John Penny, who's the building engineer, is that he thinks that there's a significant possibility that it could be recommissioned so that it operates more efficiently, and that could be another source.
Do we feel like we're converging on what these...
Yeah, we're narrowing down. It's, I don't totally understand the device, but they're able to go into the electrical circuits and target this and target that, and they get the readings, and it tells them where the spike is occurring, at first, what time of day, and then they're able to show what's going on, in which circuit. So I think we'll make good progress, and I think they've already starting to target pieces. And one of the things when we talk about the water heaters that we talked about at the primary and the upper is newer water heaters don't require all 9 coils to heat up at once. It's a gradual meet your demand. These are 54 kilowatts, and these are huge pieces. So when they click on, I understand now why the demand shoots up so quickly.
Sure. Yeah.
To Tammy's point, the next piece on the list is the Munters unit. The Munters unit was put in a number of years ago when, right before the start of school, mold was found up at Hughes. And the mold was a direct product of the humidity levels and all of that. So the Munters unit was installed. John Penny, who is our mechanical engineer, will be here tomorrow working with Eric and a person from the Munters to what I'll call recalibrate that. Because again, what happens is over time we have power outages, we have a variety of things that happen, and things get off cycle. And when things get off cycle, we're not working at an efficient rate. So John is taking that underway. That is something, because of the scope of the Munters unit, that we actually accelerated that. So we're spending $4,100 out of this year's budget to have that work done, because it's a significant energy piece. And if it's not working properly, then there's the potential that, again, we get a backlog with that machine. The next piece is air handler 3. Unfortunately, it's served its life very well. It's almost 30 years old and is on its last legs. This is not an insignificant item. This item costs about somewhere between $250,000 and $300,000. It is your major ventilation unit that is responsible for changing the air in probably 60% of the building. So every 24 hours, air has to be changed so many times. This is what does that.
Which building is this?
This is Hughes.
Hughes, okay.
So we will be looking at a warrant article, one for the whole project, but probably a separate warrant article if the voters don't support the whole project. This has to happen. This is not going to last much longer. It's a huge energy draw, and it's, in a lot of ways, it was state-of-the-art 30 years ago, and with all the changes mechanically, it has a number of issues that create energy drains as well. We're going to be completing a study again. This is a this year item for Hughes air source heat pumps versus unit ventilators. They are only unit ventilator system, and we, just like we did here, we're going to study what is the best way to deliver the heating system to the classrooms. So that study will take place. We probably will have data back November, December. Interior lighting upgrade, that's again the same as HPS, the same upgrade to move to LED lights, and the design's already done. From a timing point of view, we'll be giving an update this month, kind of similar to what we had tonight, to the Budget Committee. The fees for all this work, which would be your mechanical, your structural, your electrical, your architectural, and energy consultants fees, will all be outlined and be able to present probably, definitely November board meeting, if not October. And then what they will be doing between now and then is they're going to be starting on, they'll get a firm estimate on the barn piece, because that's ready to go to the estimator. And they'll start to get guesstimates on all the significant items, so we know if we're talking about, $1 million, $2 million, $3 million, what is the scope of the project. I want to thank the committee, Eric from the Hollis Energy Committee, Mike Levitt is there from the from the Hollis Budget Committee. Tammy serves as a school board rep. John Penny is becoming one of our lead consultants, because this is much more of a mechanical project than an energy project. So he'll be doing a lot of the calculations around what pieces should be changed and why. I think this was the piece we learned from H-Step 1. Even if you don't think it requires an architect, anytime you're working with a building and addressing building codes, it's nice to have one on board. So this is probably the most significant change we made, is having Dave on board. And then we'll also be looking at, a one-time article, but it might be a multi-year project again, because we only have the 10 weeks. So that kind of gives you the bond overview, the H-step overview, and the last piece that Kelly and I are working at, and we'll have for you next month, are the capital improvements projects that we feel should be lumped into this for that. And I'm happy to answer any questions about any of those pieces.
Just looking back at the cost comparisons of the different options, what is EII or ELL?
L, that's the section in front of it where the farmer's porch,
Oh, between the
That
two
whole section.
structures, the barn and the,
Yeah.
the L shape.
so when they're saying gut rehab existing offices, replace EL,
Right, what they're looking at,
would they add
they're going to add a foot of height.
a foot of height?
Right, so when they jack up the barn, they will jack up what I'll call the porch area a foot as well.
They also have to change the slope of the roof because for handicap access, et cetera.
Right.
The only other piece that they might have to do some supports, we're not exactly sure how good the foundation is under ELL,
Yeah.
which is the connecting piece of the two.
And it says this option adds 720 square feet?
So I think this was,
total
this is the one that I don't think we're thinking
Yeah,
of
this
going
is-
for, but there's like, it's
I'm looking at the third
the
one.
looking
connecting
at
piece
the third
between
one.
the house and the barn.
are kind of out.
trying to.
The idea was to put a second story on the
Yes.
connecting piece. And it seemed like that was more space than needed, and also a little bit awkward space too, because it was really long and skinny.
Okay, all right.
So it's like raising up the roof.
And when we're talking about gut rehab of the existing offices, I think you walked us through a nice, overview. It looks like it's really reconfiguring the full floor plan of everything.
Correct. In terms of, we're probably going to do the minor renovations to the offices, spend some money on the bathrooms.
Yeah.
Deal with some flooring issues, because again, it's just an older home, so you have, highs and lows.
Yes.
And try to balance some of that out, and then just reconfigure.
So when we say gut rehab, does that mean we're taking it down to the studs and looking at the flooring and everything?
No, when we say, we're talking specific areas, your bathrooms, looking at what is presently Rich Raymond's office.
Okay.
Things of that
So
nature.
it's spot kind of
Yes.
gutting.
Gut/rehab.
Right, and I think you're going to end up with option one, minor renovations to the offices, because that'll still get us the bathrooms done. That'll get us a better flow upstairs. So I really say it's option one or two, and I just wanted to put the two numbers out there. Again, we have no idea. We'll have I'll say an estimator, which will give us a much better number for next month's meeting.
I kind of mentioned this before in our last meeting. In terms of bonds, typically you barely go for a bond if it's $1 million, because it's almost not worth it because of the things that you have to do it. So this is considered a very small bond, even if we do the highest one at 2.2.
We would add that to the HDEP pieces also.
Right, so we would, the other thing I'm thinking of is we have existing debt service on H-Step 1.
Right.
It would be nice to get an understanding is, what if we roll that all into an all-in bond that covers everything? I think there's some ideas, at least at the BudCom, to consider maybe refining into lower cost bonds. So it may be worthwhile understanding what that picture looks like.
That is definitely something that the town and BudCom has brought up.
Yes.
Is looking at refinancing. We tend to have used, at BudCom's recommendation, the capital lease programming.
Yes.
Because again, it gives you much more flexibility with the refinancing. If you had done municipal bonds, you couldn't be having the conversation about refinancing.
I see.
So that's one of the reasons we look at that. And I'm sure, knowing BudCom and the astute folks that are in that, they'll look at, if we roll them together, if we do them separately, those type of things.
Yeah, I think there's probably an appetite, at least on their part, to say, hey, why don't you just put this all together and refi the existing H-Step stuff into one vehicle. I mean, when you really look at our debt service right now, which is any outstanding bonds that we pay, not only this district, but SAU in general, looking at from other SAUs, is our debt service is pretty darn low. I don't know what the ratio is and how they make a ratio, but our ratio is low. When you consider other districts who are doing $50 million bonds for new schools and things like that, those ratios go pretty far up. So in general, the SAU in general, we're doing really well from a debt service bond exposure standpoint. So it's not like we're stacking up other projects and other bonds that we already have. We paid a lot of that stuff off already, so. Thank you, Andy.
You're welcome.
Any other questions or concerns, comments?
So more follow, and then we still would go out and do our public forums, and obviously, if there's more follow, then we're going to put the wrong article on, we'll do the preparation for the annual meeting as well.
A lot to do between now and December, January time.
Yeah, but I think, when you think of the bond SAU project is basically kind of, that component of this is wrapping up. The H-Step component is wrapping up.
Right.
And the capital improvements, they've been on the list for a while, so it's a kind of a matter of we're getting an appetite for what the budget committee and the community may want for a bond, and that would be the filler, because just looking at the air source, the air handler number 3 and the sprinkler system, you're probably about $600,000 to $700,000 just with those two items.
Yeah, big tickets.
Yeah, there's some real big ticket items that go with this second phase of HDEP.
Would we get assistance from Dick Henry and his company from a standpoint of upgrading insulation of the offices and all that?
Yeah, he was on today's conference call, so it's really a very solid team. I think the big piece that has enhanced the team is John Penny with mechanical, because of his experience dealing with schools, especially schools of our age.
But just for the newbies, John worked very intensely on HDEP. He's
Right.
a critically important component of the science and engineering that went into it. So he's just continuing his role there.
Yeah, but I think we're actually heading a little more into his areas than solar was not John's area.
Right,
That was
right.
Dick and Charlie.
Understood. Okay, why don't we go ahead and move on if there's nothing left to discuss on the barn. Update on our budget building efforts?
Yes, happy to report that we met in July. Yes, we opened the brand-new FY20 budget, and we met in July for FY21. That first meeting takes place between the principals, Judith, Bob, and Kelly, and Kristen, who's the Hollis person for the budget. I do not attend round one. Okay, they, I think, intentionally kicked me out, because round one is to get everything in. You know, it really is, tell us what you need, tell us what you want. In August, I meet with the team, and we start talking about what gets to move to round two. And it's a very solid piece. We don't have a lot in the way of asking for staffing unless enrollment changes, which we're watching. Things of that nature, unless something came in for special ed. We are focusing a little bit on HB 1612, which is the technology security component, because one of the things that's happening is Microsoft 7 will become obsolete.
Yes.
So some of our computers, believe it or not, will not run Microsoft 10. So we will be forced to upgrade some computers. So again, something that was passed as a no expense to districts, I think they sometimes forget that we're not always on the cutting edge of technology.
Can we send them the bill?
We can, but I think at the back.
Okay, just a question.
But it'll be-
The answer's always no if you don't ask.
Yeah. So I think next month we'll be able to kind of bring you a first draft, give you kind of that broad overview. For new people, it's really something that we're trying to put to bed December, January. So we have a good portion of time to sell the budget to the community and let them engage and learn about it, and then go to the annual meeting in March. So we have a number of things.
I think as a part, this has probably come up in several cycles that, and it's not in just this district, I think it's across board members in the other districts as well, that there's some visibility at the board level as to what is making it to round two and what is not, just so we understand the thought processes, and possibly it creates a conversation. But I know board members in the past have said, hey, we would like to know what you're not even bringing forward, just so we know what you were thinking about, and, just to take us on the journey a little bit more.
And part of the balancing act is we're a budget town.
Yeah.
So ultimately, the budget committee is is responsible for the budget in terms of working for the creation. To Rob's point, I think it's knowing what I'm recommending in and what's getting cut out. The only part that becomes a problem is we get towards the tail end of the budget, it moves quickly.
Yes.
Because we're trying to set it up. So we'll do our best job to walk you through the spreadsheets.
I think it allows all of us to advocate for the budget more, because we've seen, what we've had to do to get to a certain point, what things we had to leave aside for another time, and why we're bringing it forward. So, as opposed to, and I think we've kind of, for the most part, done that over the past few years, but I just wanted to put that out there maybe for the new members who maybe haven't seen a budget cycle
Right.
before.
And just so you know, the SAU budget is almost complete, because that's the first budget to be voted on and passed, because that has to be passed by the governing board,
Yeah.
which is the legislative body for that budget, so it can be incorporated into your budgets. So we have our
The steps. Yeah.
SAU subcommittee, I think it's the 14th of this month, to bring it to the October board meeting, and then from October to December is actually the passage of the SAU budget.
Yeah, and to your point, about the fact that we're a budget town means that the budget committee owns the budget and the budget building process. So they could essentially create the budget on their own and say, here's your budget. Over the many years we've been doing this, and the trust that we've built with the budget committees, they would prefer us to build the budget and then bring a draft to them. Then they will take it on for themselves if the number's right. And they also provide guidance numbers and stuff to give us targets. It's kind of like a hybrid process over the many years. But if you read the RSA of the governing process and how budget committees work, you'd be like, wow, that's like, very different than how we actually build the budgets here, but we are governed under that, so.
And to Rob's point, it goes very well. I mean, we're well-funded. The budget committee is always open to listening and really looks at it through the lens of a child. I mean,
Yep.
We had to add a teacher unexpectedly a couple of years ago. We took it out of the contingency. They had no problem with that. So I don't want to make it sound like it's confrontational at all. I think it's a good process, and I think when we get to annual meeting, because the town citizens know the process we've gone through between the board advocating for school, the budget committee in a lot of ways advocating for the taxpayer, that's why you see the success at annual meeting.
Yeah, it's a coming together, and I think a lot has to do with the many conversations that we have with them, and this is not a one-shot, we just bring a budget and we argue about it. It's like, this literally is a conversation from September all the way till February,
Right.
essentially.
Right. The next topic, with the chair's permission,
Yes.
is just an update on our leadership retreat.
Yes.
First, I'd like to start by thanking Donna and Bob. They did what I'll call the coordination and planning. We have a few meetings, and they ran with it, and it was an exceptional 2 days. Day one, we focused on what I'll call nuts and bolts stuff. We did a lot with our strategic plan because we aligned our building goals to the strategic plan. We did a lot of goal setting. One thing that we're doing differently this year, we're going to do the presentation of each of the districts together at the SAU board meeting, because we want to look at it through the lens of a child. Because sometimes we do things in isolation, Brookline, Hollis, and the co-op, when the SAU eyes are more looking at that child. So we just want to make sure the board is able to see we're not identical by any stretch of the way, because just like we're doing math this year, Brookline is focusing on something else. So we'll see that there. One of the things that we started a couple of years ago that's gone very well, we have what we call critical feedback sessions. So you sit there as the principal and you share all your goals with about 20 of us, and then we pick you apart. And we have a lot of fun with that until you're the person getting picked apart. But it goes very well, and
Who's the, who is it, whose name?
it's all your building principals, all your assistant principals, your special ed coordinators, and the SAU personnel senior management.
Okay, thanks.
We had a great session that was led by Rick Barnes, the high school principal, on bullying, just to kind of give us all a refresher on that and all the legal components. He led it because fortunately, the high school leads the parade on bullying issues. It's typical in almost every district that you go to. We had a wonderful presentation. We had attorney Anna Cole, who works for Drummond & Woodson, who's our attorney, came in, and she went through a whole process of how to conduct an investigation regarding staff or students or getting concerns in from start to finish. It was a wonderful, wonderful thing, and it's really nice when we start to put faces to them, because Anna's always been to me somewhere on the other end of the phone. So having her in for a few hours was really nice. And then day 2, we did a building tour of each building. So we went in, we met the principal gave us a tour and kind of gave us what their goals and objectives were from the building point of view. What pieces they had done over the summer to their buildings and why, and what were some of their instructional goals. So it kind of gave every principal an opportunity to kind of show off a little bit, which was awesome. Then, as I said, we had a wonderful experience. We went, and I had never done it before, to the Historical Society and toured the firehouse and learned an awful lot about things that you kind of somewhat know being in the town all the time, but it was really nice. And that's why I think when we talk about using our building and maybe looking for some historical pieces, we happened to meet a lady who, on her property, which she still owns, is one of the original schoolhouses. Because in Hollis, it used to be, you had a schoolhouse for your neighborhood. And the kids would always walk there. It wasn't,
It was
one school.
considered a cooperative when they all banded together.
Correct.
I have old school boards,
Yep.
a lot of the old reports.
So we did that, and then we went over to, I don't know if you've ever done it, I had not. I believe it's called Andre's Art Studio. It is just a wonderful place. I didn't realize we had somebody as world-renowned as we do for sculptures and stonework as this gentleman who runs that studio. It was quite a day. We went over and they provided us with a whole scavenger hunt. And that's always fun to see. People who are in charge all the time kind of have to work together. It's really, so you get that.
Did anyone do that? Was there any video?
No, we didn't have any video, thank goodness. No game. But it was a good laugh. And it's also very interesting to see, well, say your concrete sequential people, your type A personalities versus your random abstract.
Yeah.
Because like we had a scavenger hunt and we had to take a picture with this, and to the point like somebody in my group and the picture didn't come out perfect, we had to go back and do the picture again. And for me, that was like, no, we're done. We're done. So we went back and took the picture, but it was a lot of fun, and it was a great 2 days. And I think the second day really kind of brought us together to remind us, how uncomfortable it can be for kids. Because it's like we take it for granted sometimes when we're the teacher that this is the way everybody would want it. But when all of a sudden you're in the world of learner and you're working with different learners, it really makes you step back and say, well, what do I need to do differently when I run a meeting, when I run a building, when I give teacher encouragement to change their instructional practice? So it wasn't just about being out and seeing this wonderful art institute. It was really learning for us of how do we get to all the different learners that we're responsible to make connections for, which was fun. So it was great.
Did you say at the beginning, was it Gina and Bob who did the programming for it? Oh, that's very cool.
Any other questions regarding the leadership retreat?
Where is the art studio, Andres? Is that
Andreas Art Institute in Brookline?
It's right
You've
off
never
of
been. I would have thought you'd be first and foremost.
I have lived here for 15 years as the first one I've gone.
It's crazy. Board retreat.
Only if I get to design the groups. I didn't get to design the groups last time, and that didn't go well.
Right here.
That's where you take your children to torture them, actually, according to my kids.
You finally found the design your size. That giant stone.
Yeah, it was unbelievable. It was a good day.
It's in Brookline, right on 13, and it's a giant art park in the wild woods of Brookline.
Oh, wow.
It's phenomenal.
Yeah, it was a ski hill. Yeah, and they took the old ski hill, and turned it into the studio. It's gorgeous.
Oh,
Tremendous. Wow.
And when I say world-renowned, they have 4 to 6 people who come over to Brookline, New Hampshire to work with this gentleman. He goes over to your country and visits and decides if you're kind of, I'll say, worthy to come over and do a project. And then as you go around, the artists are from all around the world.
Okay.
And there are trails, and you can take your dog, your kids, there are trails, and you will buy all these, beautiful, phenomenal sculptures, some of them abstract, some of them hyper-realistic.
Yeah, he's tremendous.
It's good.
All right, why don't we move ahead to discussion relating a district policy relating to recycling. So
Want me to
did you want
speak
to,
to
yeah,
them?
why don't you
Okay, yeah.
prompt to the discussion?
Well, I guess I would like to discuss this.
Yep.
Perhaps tabling it to October to have time to gather anything that we think is pertinent to the discussion.
Sure,
I've done a
sure.
little bit of research already, and Andy and I spoke maybe in June. One of the things I know is that both the high school and the middle school have done a STAR assessment, which I don't believe either of the elementary schools have done yet, which is sort of like the overview of how you're doing with your waste management and recycling and where improvements can be made.
So it's like an assessment.
And it's an assessment,
Okay.
yeah. So that's something that we could consider doing that would inform us. And I also had requested I don't have the documents yet for what the budget currently is for what we're spending on waste management. So that would be good to have.
Yeah.
And then looking to creating a policy, Milford does have one. So I can I have that, but I don't have it to hand out. And so then anything else that I should perhaps look into that we want to discuss at a future date,
Okay.
I am happy to do the footwork on.
Great. Just to a little roundtable from the membership, it's always good to get a sense of the board so we can empower a member to do a special project like this. So, why don't we start with Tammy and then we'll walk this way. Just to
100% for anything that we can do that would help recycle. When my eldest, who's now a sophomore in college, was here in this building, there was a strong effort made. The turtle garden was put in her third grade year. And composting was added, and she and her best friend were super interested in composting leftovers from lunch, and they were the only kids who were interested. The teacher tried to promote it. It was a great idea. They pushed it, but it didn't quite take hold. So part of what I think, things have changed and the culture has changed, so hopefully kids are now more interested, but part of making something successful isn't merely policy and planning, but also how to execute even down to the child level so that everybody can actually pull it off and make whatever you plan work. I'm happy to support whatever.
Echo that. I think as Tammy just said, there have been cultural changes just generally about recycling and waste management. So I'm happy to hear that you want to pursue this. Let me know what you need help with as well. Again, I think if we're going to build the foundation for the kids, we need to start here. Because they're going to get to middle school and high school and they're dealing with the STAR assessments and any other actions that they're taking, which obviously we don't know. That'll be part of our discussion in October. They'll be ready to be a part of that, and I think that feeding the kids who are already doing it into the areas that are starting to do it, it's only going to strengthen that program. So it's going to go through, I think, the entire SCU. Nice thought.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's an awesome idea. I know there have also been some discussion in the community about kind of the food waste, and so I don't know if that's something that we could discuss as well, or kind of a side conversation. But I know that that's something that a lot of people in the community are also concerned about. I think it's great.
No, I think it's a good idea as well. I think that the town is a recycling town. I do it every Saturday. It would be nice to have some sort of a
18 different bins, right?
Yeah. Every Saturday.
I love the transfer station.
Every Saturday.
I do.
But when we think about what the kids are doing here every day, they're having lunches and things like that, and to really think about maybe where the trash goes and how to handle it, it's a good foundation. I think it's worthwhile to look into. So, absolutely, you can be our representative for this, and also bring us along, and let's talk about things that, what you're finding and options that you're coming up with, and how we can build that into maybe a board level conversation.
Okay.
Yeah, and absolutely, and from a budget perspective, the more that the schools recycle, there's cost benefit.
Yeah.
Am I allowed to ask Mrs. Young a question about what goes on in the building, since she's sitting here, kindergarten teacher? Do you still have a paper recycling program in the building with the kids, like we did when Julia was here and Ben was here?
Yeah.
Okay. So there's already some basis to grow with,
Yeah,
to build on,
there
which
is
is
some
exciting.
probably,
And we also have Tara Happy.
Yes.
Yeah, well, that's what I was gonna say, is you can tie this, happy about happy. Well, I think you can also tie it into curriculum. So you're talking about the environmental effects with Tara and anything else as well,
You can make it a
manufacturing.
I'm just saying, there's already
The
like nice basis
organization
to
that
start
does the
from.
STAR assessments also offers a curriculum that they will do either on a staff level or they will do it on a school level.
Nice,
It's called
nice.
Trash on the Lawn Day. A lot of
Yeah, yeah,
neighboring
yeah.
communities have done it, which is they analyze and sort
Your waste
in
stream?
front of the kid. Yes, so the
Oh,
kids can
nice.
see how much is in each component of
Nice.
compost.
Visuals.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then I believe they also weigh it, so it does turn into a math problem.
Oh, I
So-
love that.
interesting.
Anything that ties in the curriculum, I think, is especially.
Okay,
Yeah.
sounds good. Andy or Gina, any input?
Well, from our meeting with the town recycling piece, I think we should be aware that there are going to be more restrictions coming in the upcoming years. And I think there's going to be more of a push for composting and things like that because as a global society, we're struggling to get rid of our trash.
Yeah.
So I think you will be seeing changes. So to me, this is just being proactive rather than waiting till 5 years from now, 10 years from now, when things are coming down that are going to become very costly. I think getting rid of your waste is going to become an expensive task.
You want to head the mandate off at the pass.
Right. So, you know,
Good mandate, 5 years from now.
So my thought would be, from a curriculum standpoint, is build this in with our youngest and let it grow as it naturally will when they transfer up to the upper school, when they transfer into the middle school, it will naturally become part of it. And I think, if you just look at the group sitting around the table, the changes we've seen in recycling over our adult lives are monumental.
Absolutely.
So I think our kids will see even more of that. So I'm for it. It's just that balancing act between, getting a policy that the board can support, getting community input, because as much as I like the concept of trash in the lawn, I'm not sure if every parent will.
Right.
So
There's a lot of
Right.
devil in the details.
Correct.
Right.
Yep.
So, and we'll learn as we go.
Okay.
So, all right, moving on to deliberations, if that's okay, to see what actions the board will take regarding the policy memo submitted by the policy committee.
Okay, so we'll start off with D. So the first five are third reading and adoption, if you are so interested. The first is DJ purchasing.
Moving so fast.
I'm sorry.
No, always so slow, it's heartbreaking, really. Oh, it's right in front of me, I'm so sorry. So I move to accept the third reading and adopt policy DJ purchasing.
Second.
Any discussion?
There have been no changes since the last meeting.
This is the very first one, DJ, right?
Yes,
DJ, yeah.
DJ.
No discussion from me.
Okay, well, seeing none, all in favor? 5-0.
Moving on to DJB purchasing procedures.
Move to accept the third reading and adopt policy DJB purchasing procedures.
Second.
Discussion.
I have one question.
Sure.
Was it the last, I remember you changed this wording of to value.
Yeah.
And then when it says price quotations solicited, where does it say this?
Last.
When it says price quotations will be solicited. So can we note, does that assume an explanation of value when it's asking, when we're asking for, am I being clear?
Well, price quote is a quote of an actual dollar figure, where I think the first, my point was just to clarify that the goal is value, not just price, but we have to solicit price to determine value.
I think what this means to me, if it helps clarify it, when I get a price quotation, it doesn't mean I'm going with the lowest bid.
Right.
I'm going with the best value for the dollar amount. So I think when we clarified to value, I see that as a great clarification, because now it allows us as a board not just to go with the best price quotation for what we might be purchasing.
I guess I'm wondering, where can we see, where are we seeing the value, I guess, in writing? Or is it not something that's?
Well, so
in
value would be
writing?
what is being, what else besides price is at issue? Delivery time, quality of
Experience.
materials, I mean, there's so much, such a large
Yeah,
range of
material quality.
elements. Do you-
Okay. And I'm
do you
not
feel it's
disagreeing with the change in
do you feel like
value
it
at
needs
all. I just-
clarifying?
No, it's good
Yeah.
to
Do you feel like there's clarifying language you want to recommend?
No.
I
So,
think the last part about the price quotations will be solicited, we do have a requirement over a certain amount to have a certain number of quotes regardless of the job. And so we're saying that, to Andy's point, we're not necessarily going to go with the lowest quote, we're going to go with the best overall value. So that's
Nor
not changing a lot
does-
of.
And the good thing, nor does the
5,000 or
policy
higher.
compel us to go with the lowest number.
It leaves it
right? 'Cause
open, but we're
yeah,
considering
Right.
some data to support our decision.
If you took out the word price and just had it said quotations will be solicited, that's taking the whole package into account, including the dollar value, and that might suffice your conflict of verbiage.
yeah, I
It's fine with
mean,
me. I mean,
it's,
So
I
agree,
just,
these procedures will require that all purchases are made on properly approved purchase orders, and that for items not put to bid, quotations will be solicited.
And I'm not necessarily-
It removes the whole price
that's right.
value
I
question.
would
Right.
support that, yes.
Yeah, I would too. Does anybody want to make the
So
amendment?
then what you should do is move to amend the motion.
I was going to, I thought we
Oh,
were supposed to.
sorry.
Well, we're discussing,
Language, I'm sorry.
No, I appreciate it.
we're discussing, so we have a live motion on the floor, though,
But
so.
doesn't hurt, can't she move to amend the
You
motion?
could
I think
amend the
we should
motion, you could
amend the
then
motion.
vote on the amendment, and then go back to the original motion.
and if others don't think it's not necessary, I just wasn't sure that I saw a line once value was changed
I-
with
I-
that last
I think it
wording.
removes
Any question?
issues down the line, because people can say, well, what, you haven't defined value, you didn't, price is price, but you didn't define value, what are you using as your yardstick, right? So
Okay.
sometimes it's better to avoid those type of extra clarifiers, because they often don't clarify. You muddy the waters
Well,
more.
and there's much
That
more
would
to a
be-
quotation than just a dollar amount.
Yeah,
Yes, okay, good.
So I move to amend it and take out the word price, as discussed.
is value in it too?
That's original.
That's the original, okay.
By deleting, right? the word-
Yep, by deleting the word price before the word quotations, paragraph 3.
Is there
A second.
Okay, discussion on the change, other than what we already talked about. All right, seeing none, all in favor of the amendment? Okay, 5-0.
So then the motion is already on the floor to accept the third reading and adopt policy DJB, so it would be as amended.
As amended.
As amended, so any further conversation on the motion on the floor as amended? Seeing none, all in favor? 5-0.
So third reading and adopt as amended.
And next is policy EHAB, data governance and security.
So I move to amend, what's all this stuff? I move to amend policy EHAB, data governance and security, in its entirety by replacing it with the copy provided, accept the third reading, and adopt as amended.
The copy provided is what's in our packet? Or are you doing, okay.
Well, I have
Oh, wait, we need a second.
a couple
if we're gonna
suggestions.
discuss
We need a
that.
second.
Second.
Okay, discussion.
All right, so this is a policy that we are required by law to have in place. It's essentially a summary policy of the data governance plan that we approved in June. Because it's an SAU data governance plan, the policy should really be the same in each of the districts. So all of these changes that you see here were changes made by a different board. And it's really clarification. One or more to the, it doesn't change the substance of it. However, what I would like to add is that this policy recommendation was made on the 27th of August. On the 28th of August, we had a Brookline meeting, and then we made some other changes. So I would love to see if you would take consideration on page 2, under section B, number 2, there's an extra parentheses that can go right before including. And then in section C, second paragraph, replacing full technology team with data governance team, just so that we're referring to the team as the same name throughout the policy.
And you said that's C, second paragraph?
C, second paragraph, it says the other members of the full technology team, and I would replace full technology with data governance.
Right. That thing
More
is a bear.
consistent.
That was a bear.
And that's the same, full technology team and
It is the
governance
same,
team are the
but
same
they were-
for verbiage?
Yeah.
Just making sure?
Yeah.
Yep. Doesn't change the members.
It does not, just, I guess, further clarifies.
So do we need to amend the motion also?
I think
I
so.
would think so, yes.
So I'd like to withdraw the motion that I made on this so that we can just start from scratch,
Yeah,
fresh.
Okay.
I'd like to move to amend policy EHAB, data governance and security in its entirety by replacing it with the copy provided as amended in the current discussion, accept it as third reading and adopt it as amended.
We'll do it.
Second?
It's on video.
That works.
I had questions about J, consequences. After listening to presentations about this and understanding more about, the people who make it their business to be, attacking information and tricking people into giving up information,
Phishing.
perhaps. Yeah. In reading it, his employees who fail to follow the law or district policies or procedures. I read through all this. There's also training provided. Is it possible, and should we have it read employee who knowingly fail to follow the law?
so with every breach, there's an investigation.
Okay.
And within that investigation, one of the things you look at is how much training was provided, how did that decision to do whatever action was that made with enough knowledge so that there's an understanding that it was intentional or not. So there's.
Okay. So that's
it's
already
very-
intended
It's very much wide open, yeah. And like I said, this is like a summary of the big fat plan.
Yeah.
So
Because
this is
all of this is coming so,
Yeah.
all this technology is coming so fast at all of us,
Mhm.
and it can be overwhelming and scary, I think, to
It-
some
absolutely.
employees that whether or not they're
intentionally
intentionally doing
right.
any of these things.
Beyond intent, there is also, and I say this with great delicacy, there is also a sort of a firmness of intent to attend to your responsibilities.
Right.
And I remember long before I was on the board, hearing some concerns expressed by some staff members in a district about inadequate training to do some internal process. I don't remember what. And this person was really, really angry at having not received the training. And I pursued that with a visit to the superintendent at the time, and it turned out there had been multiple trainings. It hadn't stuck with certain individuals, but at some point, I think the district has to be firm about, we must offer the training, it's on us by law, it's on us by policy, et cetera, and it has to be received, it has to be documented, it's been received, it has to be practiced, and then it has to be, put into practice by the folks who are responsible for it. And I say that with the greatest of respect. It's just, I think at some point you can't, the language has to be firm at some point.
Sure, and I would say this year's version of the training is to try to make sure we're kind of meeting everyone where they are. So there's a webinar portion that you could review at any time, and then there will be a face-to-face questions, conversations, like what's still out there, and then there's a signing off on it as well. So it's multiple ways to gather that information and an opportunity to say, I'm still not sure. I have a question on this.
Good.
Because it is serious.
And the other piece is discipline is always progressive. So, I mean, to go from an employee to non-employee, it's not going to happen over one incident. I mean, it would have to be so egregious.
And intentional.
Yeah, all of that. We'd have to be able to document it.
Yeah.
Yeah, the language is very strong,
Yeah.
but, so that's why.
Yep. No, I think it's a great question.
I asked Rich Raymond about this because I was in the office signing something, and he was there, and I asked him, if it was me as an employee, I'd be that employee you're describing, somebody who's been taught 10 times and make a mistake. Not intentional, but just make that careless error. I asked him, how do we protect people from just, they're so busy, they've got 20 kids in a classroom, et cetera, how do we protect them from making that mistake? And it's phenomenal, the stopgaps, the softwares, the services that he has installed to reduce the opportunity for an attack
The human error.
to get through. I was so impressed with what he told me.
Any other questions or comments? Okay, seeing none, all in favor? 500.
Moving on to BEDG minutes.
I move to accept the third reading and adopt policy BEDG minutes.
Second.
Discussion.
No changes since last month.
All right, seeing none, all in favor? 500.
Thank you. Moving on to BEDH, public participation at board meetings.
I move to accept the third reading and adopt policy BEDH, public participation at board meetings.
Discussion.
No changes since last month.
Seeing none, all in favor? 500.
Okay, so these are first readings.
Hold on a second.
Sorry.
This is what I was looking for, thank you. JCA, I move to accept the first reading of policy JCA, change of school or assignment as presented.
Second.
Discussion.
All right.
So as you can see, there's a new line. This comes from some changes in legislation. We felt as a committee this provided enough language for us to be following of the law without kind of binding us too much with too much language.
So I have a concern about this.
Okay.
I am not usually that type A person who clicks on everything, but I'm seeing this policy and the next one in a different light, given the conversations that are happening in Concord these days. So I actually clicked on the RSA links that are included in the policy, and with this document being live, they were live right to the statutes online from the state. And number one, there is no RSA 14 any longer. I printed it out. It's been rescinded in 2017. So if we
193.14?
yeah, so if you could delete that out of there.
Sure.
Just as an administrative thing. So separate from that, a line that has been in the policy since I guess it was first approved, which looks like in 2005, says the superintendent's reassignment decision shall be in writing and shall be final and binding. The superintendent determines that the best interest of the superintendent's decision, et cetera, but the state statute, 193:3, I'm so sorry to do this, Roman numeral 3, item 3, which I've printed if anyone wants to see it, the school board of each school district involved in the reassignment of the pupil votes to approve the reassignment. So I'm concerned that, unless I read this wrong, and I often do, that this policy, the way we've got it worded, the superintendent develops all of the decision-making process and does the reassigning without the school board participating in that. The reason I went and looked this up is not that I ever do that, but because I am concerned about that. If we have a student, there's a reason why the student is being recommended for a different school in a different district, and it's not in SAU 41, but it's also not in Hollis per se, which is our responsibility. We are now granting a staff member the freedom to decide where that tax money is going to be spent without our oversight of any kind. And I realize that in special education, that probably happens all the time, out-of-district placements, et cetera. But it seems to me that within regular education, the school board has to have a role in that. Am I mistaken? It's just a thought, a concern I have. And the RSA seems to support that.
Amy, we talked about this, and there. So I think they try to combine the manifest educational hardship and the change of school or assignment into one.
Right.
And we have two policies.
Right.
And for this one,
I'm sure I left it.
the combination of the new language along with the reference to JFAB, because the reference to JFAB does talk about the process.
Yeah, it does, it does.
We felt pulled together all the components of the RSA. When is the RSA that you're referencing? When was the last update? Because maybe our update was older.
2017. This was just the lookup when I clicked it. This was.
Is that the RSA?
Yeah.
So the RSA clearly states that the school board has a role.
I care about this because, not because I don't trust you guys. Change of school or I mean, this policy has been around since 2005. Clearly, it is just the run-of-the-mill running of individual cases where there's unique circumstances, et cetera. But with the manifest hardship shift, but more than that, with the kinds of discussions that I've been reading about having to do with some of the goals of the changes around manifest hardship, I'm just, I don't know. I guess I'm easily alarmed and I'm a little bit concerned. I wanted to bring it up, that's all I'm going to say. I just wanted to bring it up and bring it up for discussion.
It's referencing the RSA where it says the school board has a role, right? Where there's some sort of motions taken.
It very specifically says that.
And not only
It
that,
says the superintendent is authorized to reassign a pupil, is the first paragraph of our policy. Shall be based on the best interest of the pupil, et cetera. Obviously, all of this, I feel like I would trust Andy with my children's lives, so I'm not worried about that side of it. But I feel like the policy is missing this piece, both practically and.
Should it say the superintendent is authorized to recommend a reassignment to the board, or put something that where it's brought forward to the board? I don't want to.
Sorry.
Yeah, I don't want to venture too far afield here and, create an issue.
Well, I think what we can do is, it's a first read, so that doesn't do anything other than it brings it to the forefront and we're having a conversation about it. We definitely followed the information that we had in front of us, so I'm wondering if our legislation was a 2018 amendment to it, and so let's take a look and get some more clarity.
And by the way, if that's the case, could you make sure the link, because that's all it is, the link that's on it.
The other thing I think that is a bit of a safety net for the board is that JFAB is called out here. And JFAB clearly states that a recommendation will be brought forward by the superintendent to the board and some sort of discussion ensue.
True, but it very specifically says it's only about tuition being charged per policy, JFAB.
Right.
It doesn't mention.
So that would be
decision.
an inbound student. It wouldn't really take into account an outbound.
Well, that brings up the next point, which is related.
Can I just
please,
do my one thing before you go to the next point? Is I think if we needed to bring in the school board approval part, you can do it very easily on the one line that says the superintendent's reassignment decision shall be in writing and shall be final and binding.
Upon
approval by school board.
Possibility.
Upon final approval.
If that language meets muster legally and all that.
We'll look into it. I think, to give you an example where you see this first part of the policy, not the manifest educational hardship, but the first part of the policy, is sometimes bullying situations get so bad that a superintendent will pick up the phone and say, well, we got a great kid, it's just not going well.
Yeah.
And pay tuition. From our standpoint, we don't have space in classes, so that would be a struggle for me to do that. And then B, we'd be receiving revenue, which we have under JFAB, so we would need to bring it for JFAB. So I think we have some safeguards in place, but I don't disagree with your language, because I think, just looking at it from the superintendent's point of view, you don't want to have made that decision, hopefully, without already having the board have a clear understanding, to a non-public session saying, look, Andy's really struggling, we can, and I'll talk to the Brookline board, he can go over to CSDA and finish out his last year. It's in the best interest. The parents are willing to pay for the transportation. So it can be a very positive thing. So I think once we clarify a couple of the pieces, but my recommendation would be just to pass the first reading and come back and get clarification to Tammy's questions.
Yeah, we can refer this
And
back
then
to
at that point, if we want to
Yeah.
add that language, we can add that at the second reading.
Oh, sure, definitely not moving to add the language now, with more of an example,
Yep.
just
Yeah.
like that
Yep.
little piece,
Yep.
rather than having to change anything
I
fundamentally.
think it primes the pump for policy committee to go back and take another look at this and then bring back some recommendations for us.
And there's the other item, which says
October.
tuition will be charged as per policy JFAB. And I got confused again, because this is about sending a kid out of our district, so how are we
It's-
charging tuition based
No,
on?
it's, I read it as
Either
inbound
way,
and
yeah.
outbound.
Well, we don't get to determine what tuition they,
No.
or the other district.
Right, whatever tuition would be done between superintendent to superintendent.
But they're saying, this is saying that if, let's say, a CSDA student were
I'm
to
sorry, you
come
know
here-
what, it's the board to approve a request from another superintendent. I completely blanked, never mind.
All right, any other discussion?
Yeah, is the cost of transportation, the cost piece, is that following the RSA? Is that just right from policy?
That is existing policy, but also it's from the RSA.
All right, seeing no further conversations, all in favor? 5-0,
Thank you very much about that.
good conversation there.
I move to accept the first reading of policy JEC, manifest educational hardship.
Second.
Discussion.
Did anyone bring a physical copy with them? I left. Can you spare it?
Here's the second page.
I just have a question, this was more for Andy. Andy, what would be a scenario where you would ever waive somebody paying tuition to come to our school per this policy?
I don't necessarily see it at an elementary level. There may be reasons at a high school level around course offerings and things like that, but I struggle with, I'll say, some of the new interpretations around this, because if a particular district, maybe in a particular year, can't afford to run an AP class, I'm not sure that constitutes educational hardship nowadays with the amount of online resources and everything. So I think that would be my first question to you as a parent, if you were asking me, have you looked at the Virtual Learning Academy? Have you looked at any of the college courses, those type of things that are readily available? So it would take a long discussion. I mean, could it happen? Yes. I think it would be extremely rare.
Are you still as empowered as you were before all this legislation and shifting interpretation happened? Do you feel that you as the superintendent are still as empowered to make decisions that are really in the best interest of the child in our district, given what we offer or don't offer? Or do you feel that there's been any undue pressure to make decisions differently, or legal?
I think in some cases, there are some issues that now go to the state board that I believe are a local control issue, and I don't believe a state board can necessarily understand the different circumstances that districts face. So that's kind of a struggle, and I think you may see it challenged slightly, because it's an area where the state board hadn't got into, in my humble opinion, in the past. But again, I don't necessarily see it impacting our districts.
Any other conversation? Seeing none, all in favor? 5-0.
I move to accept first reading of policy EHB, data records retention, as presented.
Second.
Discussion. All in favor? 500.
Move to accept the first reading of policy GABA, employment references and verification, prohibiting, aiding, and abetting of sexual abuse as presented.
Second.
Okay, so
Yeah.
this is an interesting one. So this is required by law, it's brand new. The recommended policy I've struggled with for the, 6 months that it's been out. And so I thought the idea with the policy committee, can we just bring the recommendation and see if anybody has a different reading of it? So I understand the intention here of the policy. And it says that we are prohibited from providing a recommendation of employment if we have knowledge of or probable cause to believe that the employee, contractor, agent engaged in illegal sexual misconduct with a minor. Then it says this prohibition does not apply if I fully understand Part 3, if the matter's been officially closed, there's insufficient information to proceed with the investigation or the prosecution, someone has been acquitted of it or exonerated of it, or there are no charges filed. What we struggled with is this prohibition does not apply if the information giving rise to probable cause has been properly reported to a law enforcement agency with jurisdiction. So we struggled with saying that you're prohibited from providing a recommendation if you have knowledge that the employee engaged in illegal sexual misconduct, but that doesn't apply. You can then recommend them if it's been reported.
Right. I stuck hard on that. That's very weird.
Yeah, so I thought about it in different ways. I reached out to legal counsel. Like there was just no rhyme or reason to it. In my eyes, and then the other part was the information giving rise to the probable cause has been reported to DCYF. Once again, I felt like if they felt that there wasn't enough there, then that's fine, or if the case has been closed, then that's fine. But just the reporting of either, I still feel like that wasn't enough. But like I said, we just struggled with it for a while, so we thought we'd bring it for first read, sharing that information, but our recommendation would be to not include numbers 1 and 2.
Can I ask a question? What is the legal, what are you legally obliged or obligated as HR to say or not say if someone calls you for a reference? So I'm a teacher here, I want a different job, and my prospective employer calls you for a reference. When my husband works, they're allowed to only confirm the dates of employment. They're not allowed to say good, bad, or indifferent. Is that the same thing for our district? Are we under a gag order like that, or do you have...
When they call HR, you're going to get the dates of employment. Again, it all depends the circumstances of the move. If a person's, applying for a job, has touched base with Gina and I, they may even have a recommendation from us. But from an HR question, calling Kerry, you're going to get the dates of employment.
Okay. I appreciate that. Thank you.
And so,
personally, given that you're already introducing your own skepticism about it, I'd personally be willing to vote for it as a first reading on the assumption that you're going to bring back some more clarification.
I'm going to attempt to, as I said, I brought it to legal counsel with no addition, with more information as to the intent. And I felt I understood the intent, and I felt that 1 and 2 didn't really go along with the intent. But that 3 did. So we wanted to put it out there, and certainly just because you may not sit on the policy committee doesn't mean you can't communicate with us, share information, give us recommendations via email, attend any of the meetings, etc. So
Barrett doesn't have better insight, or
You have to remember that
this is so new.
well, it's not even that. The School Board Association just develops boilerplates.
Right.
And they're not going to be the ones defending you. So when we say we talk to legal, we don't call the School Board Association.
I didn't know if they had other district solutions or any
Yeah,
insights.
but even other district solutions shouldn't be our solution. That's why when we call Drummond and Woodson, who's going to be the attorney who has to stand up and defend it.
Okay.
And
they don't have any better sense of what this district did or that district did that solved this
Well,
problem?
they have their magnitude of the districts that they represent.
Sure.
But to Gina's point, it's just, again, it's kind of oddly written.
Yep,
you know,
yep.
and again, take out the policy just from a moral obligation. It's what's concerning to us.
Yep.
You know,
I also am having trouble with it being providing a recommendation of employment, and, because I don't know what form that takes. Obtaining a new position or other employment. Assisting that to happen. I don't know that we can be too narrow on it. But I don't know.
Like if you were
Just kinda
doing a
putting that out
background
there.
check on somebody who's trying to become an approved volunteer, and that person worked for another district and wants to be an approved volunteer here, a parent or whatever, and the background check might include a phone call like this to that other district here in New Hampshire who's under the same kind of legal obligations, and that person's been accused of or it's been reported, right, but it hasn't been, does that, it's not just employment. It
Well,
could
that's what I
be
mean.
anything.
And this is very specifically about employment.
I'm sure it is.
Does it have to be specifically about employment?
well, I think we have policies strictly around volunteers. So I think the more we can keep a policy very specific, it in a lot of ways can help us.
Any other questions or comments?
Is this about timeline? Is that number 3 is like the after, and number 1 and 2 are like,
During?
yeah, like when something hasn't been finalized, that there's an accusation that hasn't, and is that what you're trying to determine?
It's kind of like, I look at number 1, so call the Hollis police, so we're off the hook, and now somebody leaves, and it's, even if it's still ongoing, again, we don't want somebody going from point A to point B then to point C.
That's a problem along.
Right.
That's the problem.
Right.
Right.
And then because, again, there has been case law around districts being sued because they knowingly have passed somebody along, just because it wasn't, gone through the courts yet, doesn't mean you weren't aware of it, you know?
So there's the innocence till proven guilty, which is what's driving this.
Well, I mean, there's the
Vague
difference
language.
between providing a reference
Right.
versus, this does not include the routine transmission of administrative and personnel files. So, calling HR, yep, employee from this date to this date, that we are still required
Right.
to share, but that doesn't mean we have to say, this person would be a great employee,
Right.
et cetera, et
Right.
cetera.
Well, I think we also need to be very clear on what you mean by reference.
Yeah, that's
Because
why
when
was
I
asking
apply
about
for a
that.
job outside of a school, because I don't work in a school, when I provide references, there are people who are going to sing my praises for what I do. So if we're using reference as just saying those dates or anything, we just need to make sure that that kind of verbiage is clear.
So
Is that,
the last line of the second paragraph is routine transmission of administrative and personnel files. So those are, verification of employment is required of HR.
Right.
As opposed to the reference, which is not necessarily required.
which is
So,
more
and we're
dates.
saying do not, so the verification of employment is the dates.
Right.
But then the reference for excellent candidate is not a requirement, and we're saying, this policy would say, you can't do it if there's any reason to believe that, X, Y, or Z has happened.
Gotcha. So I guess we just want to make sure, you guys are policy, so let me know, but reference and recommendation, we want to make sure if we're using those interchangeably, that they mean exactly the same thing.
Okay. And remember, it's engaged in illegal sexual misconduct with a minor.
Oh, yeah.
So that's the point to me why I totally support Judith's piece on 1 and 2 being out.
Great.
Yeah. So I think from a philosophical community piece, we're trying to write it with our beliefs in mind, because we don't want to do that to somebody else, and we don't want somebody else doing that to us.
Right. That's why I like to tie up any
Yep.
verbiage conflict loopholes.
Yep, we will, yeah.
It's a tricky one.
Yeah.
Thank you for the recommendation on those things.
Okay. Any other comments? Seeing none, all in favor?
That one's heavy.
5-0-0.
Yeah,
Yeah, we get some good ones once in a while.
I move to accept the reading, no, we did that.
We're done. Do we have a non-public?
We do not.
All right, I'll take a non-debatable motion.
I move to adjourn, dude.
Second?
Second.
All in favor? 5-0. Thank you, everybody. At 8:03.